In your 40s and 50s, life presents a unique opportunity that too many people overlook. It's a stage where you carry the burden and the blessing of experience. You've lived through enough to see patterns, to feel the weight of your decisions, and to understand that time is finite. This period is not simply the continuation of what came before, it's a pivotal turning point, one that demands a deeper level of introspection and evolution, a deeper level of conscience, a deeper effort to trust your instincts, and an evolution of intellectual and spiritual development. At this age, if you're not consciously reflecting, you're stagnating. And if you're stagnating, you're falling behind, not just professionally or financially, but personally, emotionally, and intellectually. This is the time when many people begin to feel the tension between what they thought their life would be and what it actually is. And that's not something to fear. In fact, it's the signal that it's time to make the most important investment of your life, the investment in understanding yourself. Because the core principle that changes the game in this stage of life is this: pain plus reflection equals progress. Most people try to avoid pain. They distract themselves, deny it, or numb it. But pain is a signal. It's your mind and body trying to tell you something is misaligned. If you ignore it, you remain trapped in patterns that no longer serve you. When you reflect on your past with honesty, without defensiveness, without blame, you begin to mine that pain for insight. You start asking questions like, what have been the biggest sources of pain in my life? What role did I play in those moments? What patterns do I keep repeating? And more importantly, what lessons have I refused to learn because it was easier to avoid discomfort than confront the truth? That kind of self-inquiry isn't soft or philosophical. It's rigorous. It's practical. It's strategic. Because if you want to design the next 20 years of your life with intention, you have to base it on reality, not illusions. One of the most powerful practices you can adopt at this age is to conduct a regular life audit. Look at your career, your health, your relationships, your habits, and your beliefs. Write down what's working and what isn't. But don't stop there. Ask yourself, why? Why is this area thriving? Why is this other one deteriorating? What choices have I made or avoided that contributed to that reality? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary, because when you answer them honestly, you gain clarity. And with clarity comes power, the power to change, to improve, to evolve. People often ask, isn't it too late to start over in your 40s or 50s? That question misses the point. You're not starting over. You're starting better. You're not naive anymore. You've seen failure. You've seen what happens when you ignore red flags or chase short-term wins. You've seen what it costs to live without alignment. And now you get to use that wisdom to create something more sustainable, more meaningful. This is not the decline of your potential. It's the beginning of your conscious ascent. The beauty of this stage is that you no longer need to prove yourself to everyone. You've already built some level of stability. You've made money, built relationships, maybe even achieved some traditional markers of success. But now you have to ask yourself, is that success fulfilling, or is it just familiar? Because there's a difference. Familiarity is comfortable, but fulfillment is transformative. The midlife wisdom loop is about evolving from comfort to fulfillment, and that only happens when you prioritize self-awareness over ego, truth over image, principles over shortcuts. The more you reflect, the more you begin to see your life like a system. You begin to understand the cause and effect nature of your decisions. You stop blaming circumstances and start designing better inputs. You become a better decision maker, a more thoughtful leader, a wiser parent, a more grounded human being. But it all starts with choosing to look within instead of pointing outward. And here's the real payoff. When you embrace this loop, when you treat your pain as data and your reflection as strategy, you become someone others want to learn from. You create impact, not just success. You create legacy, not just a resume. You stop living reactively and start living by design. So if you're in your 40 years or 50 years, don't think of this time as the beginning of the end. Think of it as the turning point where you stop chasing and start choosing, where your past becomes your curriculum and your future becomes your conscious creation. Embrace the loop, learn from your life, and build the next chapter with clarity, courage, and wisdom. That's how you make midlife your most powerful stage yet. When you're in your 40s and 50s, you're not just navigating your personal life. You're also operating within a much larger environment. That includes economic systems, political changes, technological shifts, and global power dynamics. Understanding the macro cycles that shape the world around you is essential, because the trajectory of your life, your career, your investments, your family's future will be deeply affected by forces beyond your immediate control. What's most dangerous at this stage of life is operating with your head down, unaware of the bigger patterns at play. The key is to zoom out, to see the patterns, to understand how the world really works, not how we wish it worked. There are long-term economic and societal cycles that repeat themselves over time. These are not random events. They follow a rhythm, a sequence. And once you become familiar with these patterns, you can better anticipate what's coming and prepare accordingly. These cycles have happened throughout history, and they usually involve the rise and decline of major powers, the creation and destruction of debt, and the shifting of values and institutions. Right now, we are at the late stage of one of those long-term cycles. In terms of the economic machine, one of the most important cycles is the debt cycle. There are short-term debt cycles that last about 5-10 years, like the typical business cycle. Then there are long-term debt cycles that play out over 50-75 years. These longer cycles are shaped by the accumulation of debt and the central bank's responses to it. At the beginning of the long-term debt cycle, debt levels are low and productivity is high. Borrowing leads to growth, which encourages more borrowing. Eventually, debt levels become unsustainable, and central banks respond by lowering interest rates to keep the system going. But once interest rates hit zero or nearer levels, as they have in recent years, monetary policy becomes less effective. At that point, governments resort to printing money, which leads to currency debasement and inflation. This is where we are today. Over the past several decades, particularly since the global financial crisis of 2008, and especially following the pandemic, central banks have dramatically increased the money supply to stimulate economies. The consequences of that are beginning to show: rising inflation, declining purchasing power, and increased volatility in markets. If you're in your 40s or 50s, your financial future depends on how well you understand and adapt to this new environment. Traditional strategies may no longer work. Simply saving in cash or relying on conventional investment portfolios without considering inflation and currency risk may leave you exposed. Another major macro cycle that's playing out is the shift in global power. Historically, every few hundred years, there's a major shift in which country leads the world economically, militarily, and culturally. In the 20th century, the United States was the dominant global power. But we're now seeing the signs of decline in the US: rising debt, internal conflict, declining education standards, political polarization. At the same time, China is rising as a global competitor. The last time we saw a similar shift was between the British Empire and the United States in the early 20th century. These transitions are rarely smooth. They usually involve economic wars, trade conflicts, and sometimes even military confrontations. Understanding where we are in this cycle helps you anticipate risk. It helps you think more strategically about where to live, what assets to hold, how to educate your children, and what industries will thrive or decline. It makes you more thoughtful about your exposure to geopolitical risk, to supply chain disruptions, to the stability of your currency and your nation's institutions. One of the most important mindset shifts you can make in your 40s and 50s is to stop seeing the macro world as something separate from your personal decision. It is deeply connected. If you understand the cycles, you can position yourself ahead of the curve rather than behind it. This might mean diversifying your portfolio globally, understanding how to store value in inflation-resistant assets, or even rethinking where and how you work. You might need to build new skills, learn about new technologies, or adapt your business to new consumer behaviors that emerge in these transitions. Most people ignore macro trends because they seem too large or abstract. But the truth is they have a direct impact on your job, your money, your freedom, and your future. By learning from history, by studying how other nations, economies, and societies handled similar turning points, you become better equipped to navigate your own. In the end, success in this stage of life isn't just about personal habits or productivity hacks. It's about aligning your decisions with reality. And reality includes these bigger patterns that shape the context of your life. So take the time to learn how the economic machine works, understand the causes of inflation, study the shifts in global power, and most importantly, act on that knowledge. The future belongs to those who can see the waves coming and learn to surf them, not fight them. Radical transparency is not just a buzzword. It is a transformative way of living and working that can redefine the second half of your life. When you reach your 40s and 50s, something begins to shift. You start to care less about appearances and more about authenticity. You've likely seen the cost of miscommunication, hidden agendas, or self-deception in your personal or professional life. And if you're honest with yourself, you've probably contributed to those dynamics in one way or another. This is where radical transparency becomes not only relevant, but necessary. At its core, radical transparency is about removing the barriers between you and the truth. It's about seeing things clearly, speaking openly, and making decisions based on reality rather than perception. In a world where so many operate behind facades, masks, and political correctness, adopting radical transparency is a powerful act of clarity and courage. It creates a culture within yourself and around you that values truth over comfort and learning over ego. Most people are conditioned to hide their weaknesses, to avoid difficult conversations, to pretend they know more than they do. These habits may protect your image temporarily, but they cost you in the long term. They cost you trust, they cost you growth, they cost you the opportunity to build truly effective relationships, both personally and professionally. When you hit midlife, you're presented with a chance to stop playing those games, to evolve into someone who is respected, not for being perfect, but for being honest, clear, and deeply aligned with your values. Transparency begins with the self. It means looking in the mirror and confronting your own flaws, fears, and biases. It means admitting when you've been wrong, when you've hurt others, or when you've been operating from insecurity rather than principle. This level of honesty is not easy. It's uncomfortable. It might even be painful, but it is the only way to reach a higher level of awareness and effectiveness. Without it, you're operating in the dark, reacting, rationalizing, and repeating old patterns. When you make radical transparency a practice, it begins to influence the way you interact with others. You start to give and receive feedback differently. You speak up when something feels off. You listen more deeply because you're not trying to defend a fragile ego. You create an environment, whether in your family, your company, or your community, where truth is the default, not the exception. And when that happens, everything changes. Mistakes are caught early. Misunderstandings are clarified quickly. People trust each other more because they know where they stand. Radical transparency doesn't mean being harsh or thoughtless. It doesn't give you permission to be rude or blunt in the name of honesty. It means being thoughtfully direct. It means saying what needs to be said with clarity and care, holding yourself and others accountable to higher standards of truth and integrity. It's about constructive conflict, not destructive criticism. And that kind of communication takes practice, emotional discipline, and a strong foundation of mutual respect. In your 40 and 50s, radical transparency also becomes a powerful leadership principle. If you're in a position of influence, whether as a manager, parent, mentor, or business owner, your ability to model this kind of transparency sets the tone for others. People don't just follow what you say, they follow what you do. And when they see you admit a mistake, ask for feedback, or confront uncomfortable truths with poise and humility, it gives them permission to do the same. And that creates a culture of trust, learning, and shared responsibility. This principle also applies to how you make decisions. Transparent decision-making means making your reasoning visible, your assumptions clear, and your process open to scrutiny. It means inviting disagreement and testing your ideas rather than clinging to them. In a world that's increasingly complex and uncertain, no one person has all the answers. The best ideas come from open, honest dialogue where different perspectives are encouraged, not suppressed. And that's what radical transparency makes possible. There's also a personal liberation that comes with this way of living. You stop wasting energy trying to manage perceptions or avoid difficult truths. You become more grounded, more focused, and more confident, not because you think you're right all the time, but because you're committed to finding what's right. You operate with a quiet strength that comes from being rooted in something deeper than approval or performance. So if you're in your 40s or 50s and wondering how to evolve into the most powerful version of yourself, consider this. The quality of your life is directly tied to the quality of your truth. Are you seeing things clearly? Are you saying what needs to be said? Are you creating space for others to do the same? Radical transparency may feel risky at first, but over time, it becomes the foundation of everything that really matters: trust, growth, resilience, and meaningful connection. This is not just about communication. It's about living in alignment with reality so that your decisions, your relationships, and your legacy are all built on a foundation that won't crack under pressure. At this stage in life, nothing less will do. There comes a point in life, usually in your 40s or 50s, when you begin to question the metrics you've been living by. Up to this point, much of your time has likely been spent chasing personal achievement, building a career, acquiring status, accumulating wealth, creating stability. These pursuits are natural and necessary in the earlier stages of life. They help establish independence, competence, and a sense of identity. But once those foundations are in place, continuing to focus solely on yourself starts to feel hollow. That's when the real shift begins, from self-focus to contribution. This transition is not about abandoning ambition or success. At a certain stage, you realize that life is not just about what you can get for yourself. It's about what you can give back, what you can build that will outlast you, and how you can use your strengths to serve something greater than your personal interests. This is not a moral position, it's a practical evolution, because the more you grow, the more you realize that fulfillment doesn't come from consumption or praise. It comes from impact, from relevance, and from being part of something that matters. Contribution can take many forms. For some, it means mentoring others, sharing knowledge, and opening doors for those who are just beginning their journey. For others, it means building systems, businesses, or communities that create value for more than just the founder. It can mean raising children with intention, supporting causes with conviction, or teaching others what you've learned through decades of hard-earned experience. The common thread is this: it's not about you anymore. It's about legacy. It's about putting your time, energy, and insight into motion in a way that improves the lives of others and strengthens the systems you're part of. This shift requires a change in mindset. You begin to ask different questions. What problems am I uniquely qualified to help solve? Who am I mentoring, guiding, or empowering? What am I building that will benefit others after I'm gone? These are not hypothetical or philosophical questions. They're operational. They determine how you spend your time, where you direct your energy, and how you measure your life. When you focus only on yourself, your goals, your image, your advancement, you limit the scale and depth of your potential. But when you widen the aperture and begin thinking in terms of contribution, you actually increase your effectiveness. Why? Because people are drawn to those who operate from purpose, not ego. They trust those who invest in shared outcomes, not just personal wins. You become a magnet for collaboration, innovation, and long-term value when people sense that you're playing a bigger game. This is also when leadership transforms. A leader who is focused on contribution builds other leaders. They create cultures that prioritize learning, truth, and accountability. They focus on what's best for the mission, not just their own reputation. These kinds of environments don't emerge by accident. They are built by people who've evolved past the need to prove themselves and have instead chosen to empower others. But there's another reason contribution becomes central at this stage of life. It protects you from stagnation. But one of the greatest risks in your 40s and 50s is plateauing, not just in skill or ambition, but in relevance. The world is changing rapidly. If you aren't engaged in something beyond yourself, you risk becoming disconnected from people, from ideas, from progress. Contribution keeps you in motion. It forces you to stay curious, stay humble, and stay engaged with what others need, not just what you want. That keeps you sharp, empathetic, and evolving. You'll also find that contribution helps you process the regrets, failures, and lessons of the past. None of it was wasted if you can use it to help others avoid the same mistakes or navigate similar challenges. That is wisdom. And wisdom that isn't shared is wasted. Your past, when turned into contribution, becomes someone else's roadmap. That kind of meaning gives your experience a whole new dimension of value. The most successful lives are those where personal achievement transitions into collective impact. This isn't about martyrdom or self-sacrifice. It's about making your personal evolution useful to others. It's about designing a life where your skills, insights, and influence don't end with you, but ripple outward into the lives of others. That's what makes your later years not a decline, but a deepening, not a winding down, but a rising up. So if you're in your 40s or 50s and wondering what's next, the answer isn't more of the same. It's a redefinition. Shift your focus from what you're building for yourself to what you're contributing to the world. That shift won't just benefit others. It will transform you. It will bring purpose to your success, depth to your relationships, and meaning to your time. In the end, It's not about how much you accumulated. It's about what you gave that made others better and what you built that continued without you. That's the real legacy. Tools